Hello and welcome to where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today we journey back to the misty streets of Victorian London, to 221B Baker Street, where mysteries wait behind every knock at the door. It was a winter unlike any other, the air sharp with frost, the city veiled in fog, and a secret buried beneath the ice. When a terrified client arrived, speaking of death, deceit, and a frozen lane, Sherlock Holmes and I, Dr. John Watson, stepped once again into the heart of danger. Chapter 1. A Knock in the Morning Fog. The fire in our sitting room at Baker Street had burned low to a lazy glow, its warmth struggling against the bitter chill that pressed at the windows. Outside, London lay half hidden beneath a curtain of white mist. The city's heartbeat was muffled. The distant clip of hooves, the cry of a costermonger, the hiss of gas lamps fighting the fog. Within those four familiar walls, however, life retained its curious rhythm. Sherlock Holmes, dressing gown loosely tied, stood by the window with his violin in hand, and I, Dr. John Watson, had taken refuge behind the morning newspaper. Holmes was restless that morning. He had played fragments of Paganini for an hour straight, halting, rephrasing, perfecting, before abandoning the violin entirely to lean against the frosted glass, pipe in mouth, eyes far away in thought. I had learned long ago that such silence was not idleness. When Sherlock Holmes was quiet, London itself seemed to hold its breath. "Nothing of note in the papers today, Watson?" he asked suddenly, his voice muffled by smoke. "Nothing beyond the usual scandals," I replied, lowering the Times. "A fire in Fleet Street, a burglary in Kensington, and the continuing debate in Parliament about railway expansion. I dare say even Scotland Yard must be grateful for a quiet week." "Quiet weeks," said Holmes, turning from the window, "are often the breeding ground of something extraordinary. The city digests its secrets in silence before disgorging them in chaos." He smiled faintly and sank into his armchair, the familiar one by the hearth. His eyes glimmered with that odd mixture of mischief and fatigue that marked the intervals between his great cases. "You speak as though you expect another adventure," I said with a half-smile. "My dear fellow," he replied, "I never expect them. They arrive unbidden like weather." As if on cue, there came a sharp knock at the door. Brisk, precise, yet carrying a tremor that betrayed anxiety. Holmes looked toward me with raised brows. "You see, Watson?" "Meteorology." Mrs. Hudson entered, her expression caught between curiosity and concern. "A lady to see you, Mr. Holmes. She's quite beside herself, poor thing. Refused to give her name until she'd spoken with you in private." "Show her in," Holmes said gently. A moment later, the door opened again, and a woman stepped into the room, tall, cloaked in dark fur that glistened with melting frost. Her gloved hands trembled as she clutched a small reticule. Beneath the wide brim of her hat, I glimpsed a pale, drawn face and eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Please," she began, her voice low and strained, "you are Mr. Sherlock Holmes." Holmes rose and inclined his head. "At your service. And this is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson. Pray take a seat by the fire. You look chilled through." "Thank you," she murmured, sinking into the chair. The warmth seemed to uncoil her tension, though her hands still shook as she removed her gloves. "My name is Eleanor Whitby, sir. I come from Hampstead. I fear I may trouble you with a matter most dreadful." Holmes studied her quietly for a moment. "There are few troubles so dreadful they cannot be lessened by speaking them aloud." "What has occurred, Miss Whitby?" She took a breath, steadying herself. "It is my employer, Sir Alaric Denham. He was found dead 2 nights ago, on a narrow road beyond Hampstead Heath known as Frozen Lane." "Frozen Lane?" Holmes repeated, eyes sharpening. "Yes. A desolate stretch, seldom used save by those who take the forest path. His body was discovered there, lying across the snow. The authorities believe he succumbed to the cold, but—" She paused, and her voice faltered. "But there is something unnatural in the manner of it." "Unnatural?" Holmes echoed softly. She nodded. "Sir Alaric was not merely frozen, Mr. Holmes. He was encased, as though the frost had claimed him entirely. His hair, his coat, his very skin hardened as if preserved in ice. Yet there had been no storm, no snowfall that night. The ground was bare when he left the house." I leaned forward, intrigued despite myself. "You're suggesting the body was frozen elsewhere and placed there afterward?" "I do not know what to think, Doctor, but there is more. Beneath him, when they lifted the body, the constable found a small silver locket. Inside was a miniature portrait of a woman, and her initials, C.W. She hesitated, her breath trembling. "Those are the initials of my sister, Juan Clara Whitby, who has been dead these 5 years." For a moment silence fell so complete that one could hear the hiss of the fire. Holmes regarded her steadily, his gaze unreadable. "You are certain of the locket's origin?" "Beyond doubt. I gave it to her myself. It disappeared the night she died." Holmes's fingers steepled beneath his chin. "This grows curiouser. May I inquire as to the nature of your employment with Sir Alaric?" "I was governess to his niece, Miss Lydia Denham. The family resides in a manor near Hampstead Heath. Sir Alaric was a widower, stern, reclusive, but not unkind. He returned late that evening from a visit to the Royal London Club. When his coachman failed to find him at the appointed hour, they raised the alarm. At dawn, his body was found, upon the lane." Holmes rose and began to pace, the rhythm of his stride punctuated by faint taps of his fingers against his chin. "Tell me, Miss Whitby, what prompted you to come here rather than rely upon the local constabulary?" She hesitated, her gaze falling to the floor. "Because, Mr. Holmes, they do not know about my sister, nor would they care. But I cannot shake the feeling that her death and Sir Alaric's are somehow entwined." Holmes stopped before her, his shadow stretching long in the flicker of the firelight. "Explain." "Clara was once employed in the same household, years before my time. She was dismissed under disgraceful circumstances. There were whispers of impropriety, of an affair with Sir Alaric himself. Shortly after her dismissal, she fell gravely ill. Within months, she was gone." She looked up then, her eyes glistening. "I buried her myself, Mr. Holmes. Yet now, after all these years, her locket appears beneath his frozen body. Tell me that is not cruel coincidence." Holmes's gaze softened. "Coincidence seldom visits this address, Miss Whitby." He turned toward me. "Watson, note the following. A man found frozen without snowfall, a woman dead 5 years, her token newly recovered, and a governess who fears ghosts of both flesh and conscience." He faced her again. "I must see the scene myself. Has the local constable preserved it?" "I believe so. Inspector Mason of Hampstead is in charge. They have removed the body to the Denham estate." "Excellent," Holmes said briskly, pulling on his coat. "We shall call upon him presently." "But—" She glanced at him in surprise. "You will come at once?" "Of course. Time, Miss Whitby, is an accomplice to both truth and deceit. The longer we delay, the colder the trail, and not merely in temperature." I followed Holmes into motion, fetching my overcoat and medical bag. Miss Whitby rose uncertainly, gratitude mingling with fear. As she prepared to leave, Holmes paused at the door. "One more question, if you please," he said. "When you last saw Sir Alaric alive, did he seem in distress? Any quarrel, letter, or sudden change in demeanor?" She hesitated. "Now that you mention it, yes. At supper he appeared troubled. He received a note, small, folded twice, delivered by hand. He read it, grew pale, and left the table without a word. Did you see the handwriting? No, but I recognized the paper. It bore the crest of the Royal London Club. Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me, that spark in his eye which told me the chase had begun. "Thank you, Miss Whitby," he said, bowing slightly. "You have done wisely to come. We shall call upon you at Hampstead before nightfall." When she had gone, the door closing softly behind her, I turned to Holmes. "What do you make of it?" He smiled faintly. "A curious amalgam of natural and unnatural phenomena. A frozen corpse in a snowless field, a dead woman's token, and a message from one of London's most secretive clubs. My dear Watson, I perceive the shape of something quite singular. Do you suspect murder?" "I suspect manipulation," he replied. "Murder may be the simplest outcome of a far more intricate design." As he spoke, he moved to the fireplace and drew from the mantel his magnifying glass and notebook. That sacred arsenal of observation. "The Royal London Club," I mused. "I recall reading of it, a gathering place for financiers and industrial magnates." "Precisely," said Holmes, "where reputations are built over brandy and ruined by whispers. A locket bearing a dead woman's likeness found beside one of their members may prove a scandal some would freeze rather than face." He extinguished his pipe and reached for his hat. "Come, Watson, we shall pay a visit to this frozen lane before the day grows old." The hansom cab carried us northward through the fog-choked streets. As we ascended toward Hampstead, the city fell away into quiet lanes lined with frost-dusted hedgerows. The air grew sharper, the sky a pale wash of silver. Holmes remained silent for much of the journey, his eyes distant, fingers drumming lightly on his knee, the familiar sign that his mind was knitting threads unseen. At last the cab halted at a narrow turning marked by a weathered sign. Frozen Lane. The place lived up to its name. A thin crust of ice glittered along the ground, reflecting the weak afternoon sun like glass. No birds sang. The hedges on either side rose high and close, hemming the path into shadow. Holmes stepped out and surveyed the ground with a kind of reverent focus. He crouched, brushing away frost from a patch near the ditch. "Note this, Watson. The ice here is uneven. Some portions have melted and refrozen, and look, the soil beneath is soft, not frozen solid as one would expect after several nights of frost. This ground was thawed recently." He drew from his pocket a small magnifier and examined a faint indentation. "And here, the outline of a boot heel, but blurred. The impression was made before the ice set, meaning the body lay here prior to the freeze." "Then the scene was staged?" I asked. He smiled. "Elementary. The question is not where Sir Alaric died, but when." He straightened, scanning the lane as a hawk might scan an empty field. No wheel tracks, no drag marks. The culprit knew the terrain. Perhaps a local, or someone who wished to appear as one. As he moved toward a patch of glimmering ice further along the hedge, his cane struck something metallic. Bending swiftly, he pried from the frost a small, round object. It was a brass button, its surface dulled by cold, engraved with the crest of a lion rampant. Holmes's eyes lit up. "The Royal London Club," he murmured. "We are beginning to thaw the mystery, Watson." The wind whistled softly through the hedges, carrying with it a chill that bit through my gloves. I looked at him. Tall, still, his figure stark against the pale sky, and knew, with that unmistakable thrill, that another case had begun to unfold before our eyes. Holmes slipped the button into his pocket and turned toward me, his expression alive with quiet certainty. "Come," he said, his breath misting in the air. "The dead may lie silent, Watson, but the ice remembers everything." And so, beneath that ghostly winter sun, we walked the length of Frozen Lane. two shadows in pursuit of truth, unaware of the darker cold that waited yet to be uncovered. Chapter 2. The Woman in the Fur Cloak. The next morning dawned sharp and colorless, a pale light filtering through the frost that had settled upon London's rooftops like thin white lace. Holmes had been awake for hours. When I emerged from my room, I found him already at the breakfast table, not to eat, but to examine the brass button he had recovered from Frozen Lane the previous afternoon. He held it delicately between the tips of his fingers, turning it toward the firelight. "Watson," said he without looking up, "what does this emblem suggest to you?" I leaned over his shoulder. The button bore the image of a lion rampant clutching a crown, the edges polished from long wear. "It is the crest of the Royal London Club," I said. "We've seen it before on the letter Miss Whitby mentioned." "Indeed. And note the quality of the brass, not military but ceremonial. A uniform accessory, though not of an army. More likely a club porter's coat or a servant's livery. Yet the question remains, what was such a man doing in the frozen outskirts of Hampstead? Before I could reply, a firm knock echoed through the flat. Mrs. Hudson entered with a familiar figure following close behind. Miss Eleanor Whitby, still wrapped in her dark fur cloak. The chill of the morning clung to her like sorrow itself. "Mr. Holmes," she began, her voice steadier than before, "forgive me for intruding again so soon. I come with new information." "Not an intrusion, Miss Whitby," Holmes said courteously, gesturing toward the fire. "Please sit." "What have you learned?" She clasped her gloved hands tightly in her lap. "The authorities concluded their inquest last night. They have declared Sir Alaric's death to be the result of exposure. Inspector Mason considers the matter closed." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "A convenient conclusion." She nodded, her composure slipping. "Yes, but I have seen something that will convince you there is more to it. This morning, as I went to collect my belongings from the Denham estate, I found that Sir Alaric's study had been locked and sealed by order of his nephew. Yet through the window I glimpsed a sheet of paper upon the desk, the same stationery that bore the Royal Club's crest." "Ah," Holmes leaned forward. "You are certain it was not the note he received at supper?" "I cannot be sure," she admitted, "but the position of it, unfolded as if read and placed aside, suggested it might be. I thought perhaps you might wish to see for yourself." Holmes regarded her keenly. "Miss Whitby, you have a commendable eye for significance. Did anyone else observe you?" "No one. They were occupied with preparations for the funeral. The servants avoid the study altogether. They claim it feels cursed." Holmes exchanged a glance with me. "Then it appears, Watson, that our morning is well accounted for. We shall visit the Denham estate once more." Within the hour we were again bound for Hampstead, Miss Whitby seated opposite us in the cab. The wind outside sliced through the air like invisible blades. The city receded into gray silhouettes, and soon the quiet country roads stretched before us. As we approached the manor, a grim, ivy-covered house that seemed half asleep under its frost, Miss Whitby grew pale. "I must warn you," she said, lowering her voice. "Sir Alaric's nephew, Mr. Henry Denham, is a proud and difficult man. He will not welcome interference." Holmes smiled faintly. "I have never yet met a proud man who welcomed the truth. Lead us to him nonetheless." At the great oak door, a solemn butler received us and, after some persuasion from Miss Whitby, led us to the drawing-room. There, beside a black-draped window, stood Henry Denham, a tall, thin gentleman of perhaps 30, with eyes as cold as the weather outside. He greeted us curtly. "I understand you are here regarding my uncle's unfortunate death, Mr. Holmes." "The constabulary has concluded the matter. What business remains?" Holmes inclined his head. Merely that truth does not always conform to official reports, Mr. Denham. Your uncle's case bears certain irregularities. I was asked by Miss Whitby to confirm whether foul play may have been involved. Foul play? The young man gave a short, contemptuous laugh. The old fool likely lost his way in the fog. If it pleases you to search for phantoms, I will not hinder you, Tanam, so long as you do not disturb the household. Excellent, said Holmes lightly. We shall be as unobtrusive as a draft under the door. With visible irritation, Denham left us to our own devices. Miss Whitby led us upstairs to the late Sir Alaric's study, a room steeped in shadows despite the morning light. Dust motes hung motionless in the air. A faint scent of tobacco and leather lingered. There, she whispered, pointing toward the mahogany desk. The paper. Holmes approached swiftly. Upon the desk lay a half-crumpled sheet bearing the Royal London Club insignia. He unfolded it carefully. Across the page, written in an elegant but urgent hand, were the words, "Meet me at the lane before midnight. The matter cannot wait. B.T." Holmes's lips curved in satisfaction. B.T. Basil Treadcroft, perhaps. The very man whose name appeared in the club's ledger of payments to Clara Whitby. Miss Whitby's breath caught. Then he knew of my sister? Holmes tapped the note. It seems probable. This meeting was arranged privately. No coachman, no witnesses. Whoever summoned Sir Alaric knew the lane would be deserted, and afterwards someone ensured his silence remained eternal. He slipped the paper into his pocket, then turned to examine the room. On a sideboard stood a decanter and glass, the dregs of brandy still visible at the bottom. Holmes sniffed the rim. Brandy laced with something bitter, he murmured. Not enough to kill, but enough to dull the senses. Sir Alaric may have been rendered sluggish before leaving the house. I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. Then he was lured to his death? Holmes nodded slowly. Lured, intoxicated, and preserved. In more ways than one. As we turned to leave, Miss Whitby paused by a portrait on the wall. A young woman with soft features and eyes hauntingly familiar to her own. My sister, she whispered. Clara. The likeness was unmistakable. Beneath the frame, a brass plate bore the inscription, Clara Whitby, 1886. Holmes studied the portrait for a long moment. Curious that a man who dismissed her in disgrace should keep her likeness here and prominently displayed. Either guilt or sentiment. Both can be deadly. When we descended to the foyer once more, Henry Denham was waiting, his expression tight. I trust you are satisfied, Mr. Holmes. Holmes smiled faintly. On the contrary, sir. I find myself only at the beginning. Denham's lips thinned. Then I must ask that you conduct your beginnings elsewhere. My uncle's memory deserves peace, if not respect. Holmes inclined his head politely. Peace and truth are seldom acquainted, Mr. Denham. Nevertheless, I thank you for your courtesy. Outside, the fog had lifted slightly, and the weak sun shimmered on the frost-bitten hedges. Holmes walked a few paces in silence before speaking. Watson, the pieces align most interestingly. Consider, Sir Alaric receives a note from Treadcroft, meets him at Frozen Lane, and dies under conditions suggesting deliberate preservation. Add to this a locket belonging to the sister of his former mistress, now employed in his household. Coincidence? Hardly. What do you suspect? I asked. That Sir Alaric's death was not a simple act of nature, but one of design, perhaps of retribution. He turned to Miss Whitby, his gaze kind but searching. You loved your sister deeply, did you not? With all my heart, she replied, eyes glistening. Then help us bring her truth to light. Return home as if nothing has changed. Speak to no one of our findings. We shall visit Mr. Basil Treadcroft at the Royal Club this evening. Miss Whitby hesitated, then nodded. I trust you, Mr. Holmes. Only find what truly happened, for Clara's sake. Holmes touched the brim of his hat. I intend to, Miss Whitby. For I suspect the frost on that lane was not the only thing preserving secrets. As her figure disappeared into the mist, Holmes turned back toward me, eyes bright beneath his hat brim. Come, Watson, he said. London awaits us, and somewhere in its smoky heart sits a man who knows precisely why the ice refused to melt. And with that we descended the hill, the wheels of the cab crunching over the thin crust of frost. As the first faint bells of St. Pancras tolled through the wintry air, heralding not the end, but the true beginning of the mystery of the frozen lane. Chapter 3. The Gentlemen of the Royal Club. By the time Holmes and I reached the Royal London Club, the evening fog had rolled in thick and heavy, smothering the gas lamps until they glowed like faint submerged stars. The street outside was quiet save for the occasional rattle of a hansom cab or the tap of boots on slick cobblestone. From the warmth of the cab, I could just make out the club's ornate facade, all red brick and white pillars, proud and old-fashioned, like a relic of London's wealthier conscience. Holmes stepped out first, his sharp gaze sweeping over the front entrance. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "A fortress built not of stone but of status. No thief could breach it. Yet hypocrisy moves through these halls freely." Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the clink of brandy glasses. Polished oak panels gleamed under the amber light. Gentlemen lounged in leather chairs, their conversations low and self-satisfied. We were ushered in by a porter, his coat marked by the same lion crest as the brass button from Frozen Lane. Holmes's lips twitched almost imperceptibly. "Our missing link," he whispered. We were soon met by Mr. Basil Treadcroft, a tall man with silver at his temples and a charm too polished to be honest. His smile faltered only slightly at the sight of Holmes's card. "Ah, Mr. Holmes, and Dr. Watson, if I'm not mistaken. To what do I owe the honor?" Holmes accepted a seat, but not the drink offered. "A mutual acquaintance," he replied coolly. "The late Sir Alaric Denham." For an instant, Treadcroft's expression froze, the faintest crack in an otherwise smooth performance. "A tragedy," he said at last, recovering, "though I cannot see how I might be of service." "The poor man succumbed to the cold, did he not?" "That is the prevailing theory," Holmes said. "And yet certain peculiarities trouble me. The location, for instance. Frozen Lane lies several miles from his usual route. Or the fact that he carried on his person a note written in your hand." Treadcroft's fingers tightened imperceptibly around his glass. "My hand?" Holmes drew the note from his pocket and unfolded it on the table between them. "Meet me at the lane before midnight. The matter cannot wait. B.T." Treadcroft's eyes flickered to the initials. "I see. An unfortunate coincidence. I have indeed written similar notes, business arrangements, club matters. But I never sent this one. I have no reason to meet Sir Alaric in the dead of night." Holmes steepled his fingers. "You are aware that Sir Alaric had business dealings with your firm, I believe?" Treadcroft's jaw tightened. "Yes, investments. He financed one of my ventures 2 years ago. A failed enterprise, as it happens." "Failed or abandoned?" Holmes asked lightly. The man's expression hardened. "Abandoned. On his whim. He withdrew his support without warning, leaving others to suffer the loss. Myself among them." "Ah," said Holmes, as if a puzzle piece had fallen into place. Then there was bitterness. "I do not deny resentment," Treadcroft said, voice low. "But murder? No, Mr. Holmes, I am a gentleman, not an assassin." Holmes regarded him for a long moment, then rose. "Perhaps Yet even gentlemen sometimes forget themselves when pride and ruin cross paths. As we stepped into the club's vestibule, Holmes paused to inspect a coat rack. His eyes fixed upon one coat, its missing brass button leaving a small circular impression in the fabric. Without a word, he slipped a hand into the pocket. From it, he produced a faint trace of white residue like powdered chalk. He pocketed the sample and nodded to me. Our visit was not wasted. Once outside, the fog had thickened to a curtain of gray. The gas lamps blurred into halos. Holmes walked quickly, his mind clearly racing. "You suspect Treadcroft?" I asked. "Not conclusively," he replied, but the missing button, the powder in the pocket, and the tone of his denial all point toward a deeper involvement, yet the motive feels divided. Divided? Yes. Treadcroft's bitterness might explain a meeting, even a quarrel, but not a method as deliberate as the one I suspect was employed. Sir Alaric's body showed no bruising, no frostbite consistent with exposure. He was frozen, quite literally preserved, after death. The powder I found may confirm that. I stared at him. Preserved? You mean? Holmes halted under a gas lamp, his features sharp in the golden haze. "I believe Sir Alaric was killed elsewhere, Watson, frozen artificially before being placed in the lane to simulate death by cold." The implication struck me cold. But who would go to such lengths? Someone with both access and ingenuity, perhaps the same person who placed the note to implicate Treadcroft, or who used his handwriting as disguise. He began walking again, faster now. "We must return to Baker Street. I'll have the residue examined. I suspect it to be sodium carbonate or another chemical capable of rapid refrigeration when combined with water, a trick known to certain apothecaries and embalmers." When we arrived, Holmes went immediately to his chemical table. Within minutes, the air was filled with the sharp tang of reagents. I watched as he mixed the powder with water. It fizzed violently, producing a sudden chill that frosted the sides of the beaker. "Just as I thought," he said, eyes gleaming. "This compound could freeze flesh within minutes. Whoever used it knew precisely what they were doing." Before I could respond, a soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, holding a sealed envelope. "This just arrived by messenger, Mr. Holmes. No name given." Holmes took it, broke the seal, and unfolded the letter. His brows knit as he read aloud. "If you value the lady's safety, cease your inquiries. The frost will claim another before dawn." Watson, we both stared at one another. "The lady?" I asked. Holmes's voice dropped. "Miss Whitby." Without another word, he seized his coat and revolver. "Come, Watson. There is no time. Someone knows she sought our help." Within minutes, we were racing once more through the fog-choked streets, the hooves of our cab horse striking sparks against the stones. Somewhere ahead, in the vast frozen silence of Hampstead, danger had already begun to move. Silent, deliberate and cold as the grave. Holmes's eyes gleamed through the haze. "The killer thinks to frighten us into retreat," he said grimly. "But fear, my dear Watson, is a poor match for deduction." And as the carriage vanished into the white mist, I knew the real hunt had begun. Chapter 4. Shadows of the Royal Club. The next morning dawned gray and bitterly cold, as though London herself had drawn a shroud across the sky. Holmes had not slept. When I awoke, he was already seated before the fire at 221B Baker Street. His long, lean fingers steepled beneath his chin and his eyes distant. A half-burnt telegram lay beside him. Without turning, he said, "Watson, it appears that our little visit to the Royal Club has stirred more than conversation. Mr. Basil Treadcroft boarded a train for Dover at dawn." "Fleeing?" I asked, pulling my dressing gown tighter against the chill. "Possibly, but not from guilt, from fear. The letter we received last night has frightened more than just us." He rose and began to pace. "There are hands behind this that even Treadcroft dreads." The wind rattled the panes and a gust carried the faint clang of church bells through the fog. I poured 2 cups of coffee, and as I handed him one, Holmes gave me a brief nod of appreciation before continuing. "The Royal Club is no mere gathering of idle gentlemen," he said. "It is the meeting place of certain financial powers, men whose wealth grants them the illusion of immunity. If Sir Alaric Denham was indeed murdered, the motive will be found within that circle." "Then our next step?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "To step back into the lion's den." By midday, we were once again passing beneath the gilded awning of the Royal Club. The doorman recognized us and hesitated, uncertain whether to admit us after last night's inquiries. Holmes handed him a small slip of paper. "Be so kind as to deliver this to Lord Henry Draycott," he said smoothly. "Tell him Sherlock Holmes requests a moment of his time, regarding Sir Alaric Denham." The name did its work. Within minutes we were escorted through corridors lined with hunting portraits and the dull gleam of brass gas fittings into a private reading room where Lord Draycott, a man of heavy build and calculating eyes, awaited us. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice slow and deep, "you are a man of reputation, but I confess your interest in our club puzzles me." Holmes's tone was light, almost conversational. "I seek only truth, my lord, a truth that has been kept inconveniently cold." Draycott frowned. "You refer to Denham's death?" "Precisely. You were among the last to see him alive." "That's absurd," Draycott replied. "I haven't spoken to Alaric in months." Holmes drew from his pocket the brass button we had found on Frozen Lane. "Strange, then, that your club's livery should mark the place where his body lay." For a moment, silence. Then Draycott's gaze darkened. "That proves nothing. Our servants' uniforms are not rare, and buttons fall easily." "Quite so," said Holmes mildly. "Yet this one bore traces of sodium carbonate, a chemical used in certain preservation experiments. I happen to know that a Mr. Edmund Foyle, a taxidermist in Camden, has recently been paid by someone associated with your club." "Paid handsomely." Draycott's composure faltered. "You know too much, Mr. Holmes." "Only enough to recognize that Denham's death served more than personal revenge. It silenced a man who knew too much about someone's financial misdeeds." Draycott's heavy hands clenched. "You have no proof." Holmes smiled thinly. "Not yet." He rose to leave, but Draycott's voice stopped him. "Take care, Holmes. Men have vanished for less." Holmes inclined his head. "And yet I have the inconvenient habit of reappearing." Outside, as we hailed a cab, Holmes said quietly, "Did you note it, Watson? The right cuff of Draycott's coat bore faint salt stains. He has been near freezing compounds recently." I nodded. "You think he's our killer?" Holmes shook his head. "No, too shrewd to soil his own hands. He is protecting someone. Perhaps the same woman mentioned in that warning letter." We rode in silence for several minutes. The cab wheels hissed over wet stone. Then Holmes said, "Our next call must be upon Mr. Foyle, the taxidermist. The workshop of deceit, as it were." "Do you believe he handled the body?" I asked. "I believe he handled something worse, the illusion of truth." The workshop was a grim affair on the outskirts of Camden Town. A narrow sign hung askew above the door. "Foyle and Sons, preservation of all kinds." The interior smelled of oil, dust, and decay. Shelves were stacked with glass jars and dull instruments of the trade. Mr. Edmund Foyle was a small, sallow man with pale, twitching hands. When Holmes introduced us, his eyes darted nervously between us like a cornered animal. I don't know what you mean," he stammered after Holmes mentioned Sir Alaric. "I prepare only animals, gentlemen. Birds, foxes, the occasional hound. Never men." Holmes picked up a long-handled brush coated with a crystalline residue. "You use this compound often, Mr. Foyle." "It keeps the tissue firm, sir. Slows decay." "Indeed," Holmes said, "and when mixed with whale oil it prevents thawing even in mild temperatures." Foyle went pale. "How could you—" Holmes fixed him with that piercing gaze of his. "Because I've seen your handiwork, Mr. Foyle, on a frozen corpse in Hampstead. You were paid well for that commission. By whom?" The man's lip trembled. "I can't say." "You will say," Holmes replied, his tone suddenly hard as steel. Foyle sank into a chair, wringing his hands. "I swear I didn't kill him. They just told me to keep the body from changing. They brought it to me already dead, said it was for research, a medical exhibition." "Who brought it?" Holmes demanded. Foyle hesitated, eyes darting to the back door as though expecting someone to burst through it. Finally, he whispered, "A woman. She wore a veil, spoke like a lady, left an envelope from the Royal Club and said no questions were to be asked. The payment was delivered later, in gold sovereigns." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "A woman from the club's circle," he murmured. "We are drawing closer, Watson. Can you describe her?" I asked. Foyle nodded shakily. "Tall, graceful, dressed in black with a brooch of white enamel, shaped like a swan." Holmes's expression changed ever so slightly. "A swan, you say?" "Yes, sir." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, do you recall the locket Miss Whitby showed us on the day she came here? The one bearing her late sister's initials?" "Yes." It, too, bore the figure of a white swan. A cold silence hung in the air. Holmes straightened, eyes gleaming with the dangerous excitement of revelation. "Come, Watson. I believe Miss Whitby's connection to this affair runs deeper than mere employment. If my reasoning is sound, the answer to Sir Alaric Denham's death lies not in the Royal Club, but in the heart of the Whitby family itself." He turned back to Foyle. "You will remain in London, Mr. Foyle. Scotland Yard will wish to speak with you, and I trust you'll be honest. Should you feel tempted to disappear, I assure you I shall find you again." Foyle nodded, trembling. As we stepped out into the bitter wind once more, Holmes adjusted his collar and looked toward the fog-shrouded skyline. "Watson," he said quietly, "when one begins to freeze a truth, it never remains wholly dead. The ice may conceal, but it always cracks in time." He hailed a cab and stepped in, his eyes already lost to thought. "Back to Baker Street. We have one more interview to conduct, with Miss Eleanor Whitby." The cab wheels turned, slicing through puddles that gleamed like sheets of black glass. Somewhere beyond the mist I could feel the case turning, the first crack spreading across the frozen surface of a secret that had waited far too long to thaw. Chapter 5. A Sister's Secret. The hour was approaching dusk when we returned to Baker Street. The streets shimmered with damp cobblestones, the last light of the sun struggling through a veil of yellow fog. I remember thinking that even the city itself seemed to hold its breath, as though it sensed Holmes was about to uncover something that would alter the shape of the mystery entirely. Holmes went straight to the window, hands clasped behind his back, his eyes half hidden by the reflection of the gaslight. "Watson," he said, his voice low but charged with certainty, "the threads converge upon Miss Eleanor Whitby. Whether as witness, accomplice, or avenger, she stands at the center of this icy web." I was about to respond when Mrs. Hudson entered, announcing that Miss Whitby herself had called upon us. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Providence," he murmured. "Show her in, Mrs. Hudson's and prepare tea, if you please. Warmth may loosen what fear keeps frozen." A moment later, Miss Eleanor Whitby stepped through the door. She looked far more composed than when we had first met her, yet there was a stillness about her, like someone holding a mask firmly in place. Her dark dress was modest, but her gloved hands trembled ever so slightly as she sat. "I have come," she said softly, "because I felt you might discover what I dared not speak. The matter weighs upon my soul, Mr. Holmes, but I fear what truth may cost." Holmes bowed slightly. "The cost of silence is often greater, Miss Whitby. You have nothing to fear here, save your own conscience." She gave a faint, humorless smile. "Then I am already doomed." Holmes gestured for her to continue, saying nothing, his gaze fixed upon her face. "I told you," she began, "that Sir Alaric Denham was my employer, that I served as governess to his niece. That much was true, but I did not tell you that I once knew him under another name, long before my employment at his house. He was involved with my sister, Clara." Her voice wavered. "She was beautiful, spirited, too trusting of a man who promised her the world. Sir Alaric seduced her, then cast her aside when it suited him. She bore the shame alone. A year later she died. They said of fever, but I believe it was despair that killed her." Holmes inclined his head slightly, his voice gentle. "Your sister's initials were engraved upon the locket found beside the body. You must have placed it there." Her eyes widened. "You know of that?" "Of course," Holmes replied. "Such gestures are rarely accidental. You wish to make Sir Alaric face in death the memory he had tried to bury." Miss Whitby's composure faltered. She clasped her hands tightly. "I went to his house that evening," she said in a whisper, "to beg him for some acknowledgement of what he had done. I did not intend harm, only truth, but he laughed. He said Clara had been nothing more than a childish mistake, and that women of our station should be grateful for crumbs of attention." Her voice broke, but she continued, "I left in fury. Yet later that night I returned. His study window was still lit. I saw him through the glass, writing, drinking. When I entered, he was already still." "You found him dead?" I asked, unable to conceal my astonishment. "Yes. There was no sign of struggle. His wineglass lay shattered. I thought at first he had taken poison, but when I touched him, he was already growing cold." Holmes's expression did not change, but I could tell from the tightening of his jaw that this confession fit neatly into his growing mosaic. "You told no one," he said quietly. "How could I? A servant alone in a dead man's house would be ruined by suspicion. I panicked. I left the estate and took refuge in London. 2 days later, the newspapers announced that Sir Alaric had been found frozen on Frozen Lane." She raised her eyes to Holmes. "How could that be, Mr. Holmes? He was dead before that night." Holmes's voice was calm, almost compassionate. "Because, Miss Whitby, someone moved his body. Someone wished to disguise his true death and cast confusion upon all who sought it." She looked at him in silent terror. "You think that was me?" "No," Holmes said, shaking his head. "You lacked the means, and perhaps the cruelty. But someone used your grief. A person who knew both your connection and your silence would make convenient cover." Her gaze fell. "There was a man at the house, Basil Treadcroft. He visited often under the guise of business. After my sister's death, I saw him once meeting Sir Alaric in secret. I believe they quarreled over money." Holmes's eyes glinted. "Ah, yes, Treadcroft, the desperate investor. He had motive, opportunity, and enough influence to conceal the act. But no skill in chemicals, no knowledge of preservation. That, I suspect, came from another quarter." He turned away, pacing before the fire. "Tell me, Miss Whitby, have you any idea who might have helped arrange the removal of the body?" She hesitated. "There was a woman. I met her once at Sir Alaric's estate. A Lady Draycott. She seemed close to him. Far too close. She said to me once, "Men like him never freeze them, they rot from within." Holmes stopped mid-stride, his back straight. "Lady Draycott, wife of Lord Henry Draycott of the Royal Club." "Yes," Miss Whitby whispered. Holmes turned to me, his expression fierce with sudden illumination. "Watson, the circle tightens, the Royal Clubs, the finances, the preservation compound from Foyle's workshop. It was not merely revenge, it was a cover-up. Denham's death protected the reputations of others. And Lady Draycott, I suspect, was their instrument." He looked back at Miss Whitby, his tone softening. "You were drawn into a crime greater than your own pain, Miss Whitby. Your sister's tragedy became the thread by which others wove deceit." Tears filled her eyes. "Then Clara's name will never be clean." Holmes took a slow breath. "On the contrary, if I am correct, it was your sister's memory that guided the hand of justice, though unconsciously through you. The guilt of those men will not remain buried. Ice conceals. It does not absolve." She rose unsteadily, clutching her gloves. "Then what will you do?" Holmes's voice dropped to a low murmur. "Find the link that binds Treadcroft Draycott and the woman in the veil, and expose the heart of this frozen conspiracy. You, Miss Whitby, will remain in safety. No more night wanderings or solitary walks. The shadow that follows you is not of your own making." She nodded faintly, her face pale but relieved. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Whatever happens, I trust you will uncover the truth, for Clara's sake." As she left, the room fell silent. The wind moaned faintly down Baker Street, carrying with it the chill of the approaching night. Holmes stood for several minutes, lost in thought. Then he turned to me abruptly. "Watson, we dine early. Tonight we pay a visit to Camden once more. I believe Mr. Foyle still holds the final piece on him, and perhaps a visitor yet unannounced." I stared at him. "You think someone will come to him?" "Without question," Holmes replied, his eyes alight with that peculiar energy that always signaled the nearness of revelation. "Guilt drives men to confession, Watson. But fear drives them to folly. Let us see which holds sway by midnight." He reached for his cloak and hat, then paused at the door. "And remember this, my dear fellow. In the matter of the frozen lane, the dead are not our only ghosts." Then with a last glance toward the fog-silvered street, he added quietly, "Sometimes, Watson, a sister's love can conceal the truth, and yet it is love that ultimately reveals it." And with that, we stepped once more into the cold London night, the frost crunching beneath our boots like glass beneath the weight of truth about to break free. Chapter 6. The Workshop of Cold Deceit. It was nearing 8:30 when Holmes and I reached Camden Town, that dreary district of workshops and narrow alleys where the air forever smells of oil, damp, and soot. The evening fog hung low and pale over the rooftops, curling like the breath of some great slumbering beast. The sign of Foyle and Sons, preservation of all kinds, swayed gently in the wind, its paint cracked and ghostly in the lamplight. Holmes motioned for silence as we approached. "Observe, Watson," he whispered. "There's a faint glow from the rear window. Foyle should have closed long ago. Our visitor is punctual." We slipped into the shadow of a narrow passage that smelled of cold iron and mildew. Through the grimy window panes we could make out Mr. Edmund Foyle hunched at his workbench, the lamplight flickering over his pale features. Opposite him stood a woman dressed in black, tall, composed, her face hidden by a mourning veil. Holmes leaned closer, the frost of his breath clouding the glass. "Lady Draycott," he murmured. "As I suspected." I started. "You're certain?" "Beyond doubt. The bearing of her posture, the brooch at her breast, a white enamel swan identical to the one Miss Whitby described." Stay low, Watson. We shall learn more by silence than by intrusion. Through the distorted glass, we could faintly hear the woman's voice, calm but edged with iron. You were paid, she said, and paid well. You swore to destroy the notes, the ledgers, every trace. Foyle's reply came trembling. I did as you asked, my lady. But Mr. Holmes came. He's clever. Too clever. He found the compound, the residue. Then he knows, she said sharply. And if he knows, he must be silenced. Holmes's hand closed around my arm. His voice, low as the wind itself, said, We've heard enough. But before we could withdraw, a board beneath my foot gave a sharp crack. Foyle's head jerked up. Someone's there! Holmes moved instantly, pushing the door open with such calm confidence that even Foyle looked uncertain. Quite right, Mr. Foyle, Holmes said evenly, stepping into the light. And if you value your liberty, you will not make this worse by deceit. Lady Draycott turned slowly. The lamplight caught the curve of her cheek beneath the veil, smooth, aristocratic, unflinching. Mr. Holmes, she said coolly, I was told you had a fondness for dramatics. I see the reports were correct. Holmes bowed slightly. Merely a practical entrance, madam. The door was unlocked, and curiosity has ever been my weakness. You have chosen an unfortunate setting for your midnight appointment, unless, of course, one enjoys the company of embalmed creatures. Foyle's hands fluttered nervously, glancing between them like a man trapped between two forces of nature. I swear, sir, I did nothing. Indeed, Holmes interrupted, nothing except freeze a corpse, conceal its true condition, and accept gold for your silence. The law would call that accessory after the fact. Lady Draycott stepped closer, her tone cold as the air itself. You presume much, Mr. Holmes. I came here only to ensure that the scandal surrounding Sir Alaric's death did not touch innocent lives. An admirable sentiment, Holmes replied dryly. Were it not that your definition of innocence appears exceedingly narrow, you sought to protect your husband's reputation, and perhaps your own. Sir Alaric Denham's knowledge of certain Royal Club investments threatened exposure. Eliminating him was both convenient and lucrative. Her voice sharpened. You speak without proof. Holmes's eyes flashed. Proof? You are standing in it. The workshop, the chemical residue, the payment through a Royal Club account, all point to you. But I grant, madam, you were not alone. Basil Treadcroft provided the funds. Lord Draycott provided the silence. And you, the cunning hand to guide the illusion. She did not move. For a long moment, the only sound was the slow ticking of a clock and the faint hiss of the lantern. Then she laughed, softly, bitterly. You think me a murderer? Holmes did not answer. She drew back her veil. Her face, once proud, now bore the exhaustion of sleepless nights. No, Mr. Holmes, I did not kill him. But I did arrange what followed. Sir Alaric was found dead in his study. I do not know how. Treadcroft came to me terrified. He said ruin was upon us if the truth emerged, so we contrived to preserve him, to make it appear as though the cold had taken him. A quiet tragedy, no scandal, no inquiry. Her gaze turned to Foyle. He was paid to ensure the illusion. Holmes regarded her for several seconds, then said quietly, And Miss Whitby? Did you know she would become your scapegoat? The color drained from her face. She was never meant to be harmed. But when her locket was found, it made for a convenient distraction, Holmes finished. The grieving sister, the wronged governess, all too simple a tale to satisfy the public's appetite. Lady Draycott's composure cracked. You do not understand, Mr. Holmes. Men like Sir Alaric destroy without consequence. My husband's fortune, our family's name, all tied to his treachery. I did what necessity demanded. Holmes's tone softened, though his eyes did not. Necessity has ever been the plea of those who cannot face conscience. You froze not only a man, Lady Draycott, you froze justice itself. She looked away. Then take your triumph. I am beyond fear. At that moment, the door burst open. Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard entered with 2 constables, his mustache bristling with importance. Evening, Mr. Holmes. Got your telegram just in time. Thought I'd drop by before bedtime. Holmes smiled faintly. Excellent timing, Lestrade. You'll find Lady Draycott and Mr. Foyle here most eager to discuss their refrigeration techniques. Lestrade blinked. Refrigeration? Holmes waved a hand. A manner of speaking. The lady's statement will clarify matters. Be gentle, Lestrade. She has merely preserved the truth in a most unusual fashion. Lestrade looked bewildered, but his men began. Be their work. Lady Draycott made no protest as she was escorted to the waiting carriage, her veil drawn once more. Foyle, trembling, followed like a man already halfway to the gallows. When they were gone, Holmes stood by the workbench, gazing at the instruments, the frost-stained brushes, the jars of pale fluid, the lifeless eyes of stuffed creatures staring from shelves. There's something monstrous, I said quietly, in a place where life and death are treated as craft. Holmes nodded. Indeed, Watson, it takes a certain kind of mind to believe one can preserve truth by freezing it. Yet every deceit leaves warmth somewhere, a trace, a breath, a heartbeat of motive. That is what we follow. He turned toward the door, adjusting his coat. Come. There remains one final truth to thaw, and it lies not with the lady but with Miss Whitby. Her story, I fear, is still incomplete. As we stepped back into the cold night, the wind howled down the narrow streets, carrying with it the scent of chemicals and old dust. The gas lights flickered weakly, their flames bending under the breath of winter. Holmes paused once, looking up at the heavy clouds rolling over the city. Do you see, Watson? He said softly. Even in this fog, the stars persist, hidden, but never gone. So it is with truth. One need only wait for the mist to break. And as we walked away from the workshop of deceit, I could not shake the feeling that beneath London's frozen calm something vast and hidden was beginning, at last, to melt. Chapter 7. The Girl in the Frosted Mirror. When dawn broke over London the next morning, it brought with it a fragile, watery light that seemed unwilling to commit to the day. The fog had thinned, yet a chill lingered, the kind that seeps through the very bones of the city. Holmes stood at the window of 221B Baker Street, his lean figure framed by the pale glow of morning, while I sat beside the fire nursing a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The events of the previous night, Lady Draycott's confession, Foyle's arrest, and the eerie atmosphere of that embalmer's workshop, still haunted my mind. Yet Holmes, though outwardly calm, possessed a restlessness I had come to recognize as the prelude to revelation. He turned suddenly, his sharp gray eyes alight. Watson, he said, we must see Miss Whitby at once. I set down my cup. You believe she is still in danger? More than danger, he replied. She is the key to the puzzle. Lady Draycott's words have given us motive, means, and deception, but not the truth of Sir Alaric's death. The heart of the mystery lies not in frozen corpses or chemical trickery, but in emotion, in betrayal, and in love. Within the hour, we were in a hansom cab rattling toward Bloomsbury, where Miss Clara Whitby had taken refuge in a modest lodging house. The streets were slick with the remnants of frost, and the air carried that peculiar stillness London knows only after scandal, when rumors have begun to circulate, but judgment has not yet decided its course. When she received us, Miss Whitby looked pale and weary. Her eyes ringed with sleeplessness. Yet there was in her manner a kind of quiet dignity, the composure of one who has suffered long and grown used to it. "Mr. Holmes," she said softly, "I heard what happened. Lady Draycott has been arrested?" "For complicity, yes," Holmes said. "But I suspect you know more of her husband's death than you have yet told." Her hands trembled slightly. "I have told all I can remember. Sir Alaric was kind to me. More than kind. But after that dreadful night—" "Permit me," Holmes interrupted gently, "and to fill in the blanks." He paced before the fireplace, his voice smooth and deliberate, like a teacher guiding a hesitant pupil through the final steps of an equation. "You came to Sir Alaric's house on the evening of his death," he began. "You intended to resign your post, perhaps out of some moral discomfort. Yet something happened that night. Something that altered the course of your life." She looked away. I heard raised voices. Sir Alaric and Lady Draycott were quarreling. I thought it improper to remain, so I went upstairs. When I returned later to collect my things, the house was silent, and then—" Her voice faltered. "And then you found him," Holmes said quietly. "Cold, already dead, the frost upon his skin unnaturally swift." Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes, I thought it the chill. The house was freezing that night." Holmes stopped pacing and faced her. "You are mistaken, Miss Whitby. The chill was no act of weather. It was the result of Foyle's handiwork. But that was done after death, not before. The question remains, how did Sir Alaric die?" She hesitated, then said in a trembling whisper, "There was a mirror, Mr. Holmes, a great one in his study facing the window. When I found him, he was seated before it, as though staring into it, and there was frost upon the glass, though the fire still burned." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Frost upon the mirror?" She nodded. "Yes, it was strange. The frost seemed to form the shape of a hand, pressed from within." He turned to me with that sudden spark of triumph that I had learned to recognize. "Watson, the very clue we needed. The frost was no accident. It was a reaction, chemical, not natural. A volatile compound drawn from the same preservative mixture found at Foyle's. Someone sprayed it upon the glass, and upon Sir Alaric himself, to disguise the true cause of death." "Disguise?" I echoed. "Then he was murdered?" Holmes's gaze shifted back to Miss Whitby. "Tell me, my dear, did Sir Alaric suffer from any weakness of the heart?" "Yes," she whispered. "The doctor warned him against strong emotions. He often said the slightest shock might—" "Precisely," Holmes interrupted. "He was not killed by poison or weapon, but by terror." "Terror?" she repeated aghast. "An old and efficient method," Holmes said gravely. "Someone intended not to soil their hands with blood, but to strike at the mind. The mirror, the frost, the apparition of his own reflection distorted by the vapors. It was meant to convince him that death itself had come to claim him." Miss Whitby clasped her hands. "Then it was not Lady Draycott?" Holmes shook his head. "No. She merely acted afterward to conceal what she believed an accident. But the true murderer is another, one who stood to gain most from Sir Alaric's death and who possessed the means to orchestrate such a frightful illusion." "And who is that?" I asked. Holmes's expression grew distant, his voice lowering to that half-whisper I had heard only when his mind was fully engaged. "There is but one person who fits all. The manipulator behind the curtain, Basil Treadcroft. Banker, chemist, and friend to both Sir Alaric and Lord Draycott. He provided the compounds, managed the accounts, and ensured the debt transfers occurred immediately after the supposed accident. The man is a spider in human form." Miss Whitby sank into her chair, her face pale. "But what of me? Why did they blame me?" Holmes's gaze softened. "Because you were convenient, Miss Whitby, An orphan without means or protector and attached to the household at the time of death. They needed only your locket in his hand, and the rest followed naturally. You were meant to vanish quietly under accusation while their names remained clean. A tear slid down her cheek. Then, I am free? Not yet, Holmes said gently. Freedom must be claimed, not granted. You will accompany us this evening's tour to Treadcroft's estate. I have arranged for a gathering of interested parties. The stage is set, and the final act awaits. The clock on the mantel chimed softly as she rose, trembling but resolute. I will do as you say, Mr. Holmes. I only wish for the truth to be known. Holmes gave a faint smile. And it shall be, Miss Whitby, as surely as frost melts in the light. As we departed her lodging, the first true sunlight of the day broke through the haze, casting golden bands across the street. Holmes drew his coat tighter, his eyes bright and far-seeing. The case has taken its shape, Watson, he said. We have the shadow, the mirror, and the frost. Symbols all of deception. But tonight we shall hold them to the fire. And when the truth emerges from the thaw, it will be cold, clear, and merciless. And though the morning seemed at last to warm, I could not shake the shiver that ran through me. For I knew that the night ahead would reveal not only guilt, but the frozen heart of human ambition itself. Chapter 8. The Frost Unmasked. The hour was nearing 8 when Holmes and I arrived at Basel, Treadcroft's townhouse in Kensington, a structure of handsome design but cold demeanor, much like its master. The night was brisk, the sky washed in silver by a reluctant moon, and frost already clung to the railings like lacework spun by winter's hand. Inside, the glow of chandeliers and the murmur of genteel conversation seemed to deny the chill beyond the walls. Yet beneath that veneer of comfort, something sharp and secret simmered in the air. Treadcroft received us in his drawing room, a tall man with sleek hair brushed precisely back from his temples, his manner smooth, practiced, and utterly without warmth. His eyes, pale blue, almost translucent, flicked between Holmes, Miss Whitby, and myself as if weighing our very existence. Mr. Holmes, he said, his lips forming what might have been a smile. I am told you have been asking rather impertinent questions. Shall I assume you've come to deliver an apology? Holmes inclined his head. On the contrary, Mr. Treadcroft, I have come to deliver clarity, and perhaps a confession. Which of those you choose to provide is entirely up to you. Treadcroft's smile tightened. How droll! And what exactly have I to confess? Holmes gestured toward the fireplace. May we sit? I find that truth, like tea, benefits from a little warmth. Treadcroft motioned with a flick of his hand, his arrogance barely masked by civility. Miss Whitby took a seat beside the hearth, her face pale but determined. I stood near the door, ever ready should Holmes require assistance. Holmes began in his usual unhurried tone, his eyes half-lidded in apparent leisure. You knew Sir Alaric Denham well, did you not? Treadcroft shrugged. He was a client among many. We shared business interests, shipping, preservation compounds, the like. Indeed, Holmes said. And you also supplied him with certain chemical mixtures for the preservation of exotic specimens? Treadcroft's brows arched faintly. Naturally, he was fond of curiosities. Holmes nodded. A fondness that unfortunately led to his demise. Tell me, have you ever heard of crystalline vapor? The man froze, only for an instant, but Holmes noticed. He always noticed. I see the name rings a bell, Holmes continued smoothly. A volatile substance that, when exposed to air, produces a sudden burst of frost and a hallucinatory fog. Its composition is delicate, a balance of ether and metallic salts. I found traces of it on Sir Alaric's mirror in Foyle's workshop, and... He paused delicately. On your own order ledgers, Mr. Treadcroft. The banker's composure flickered. You broke into my offices? Holmes smiled faintly. My dear sir, you flatter me. Scotland Yard has its uses, especially when properly encouraged. Lestrade, who had entered quietly moments earlier at Holmes's summons, gave a short grunt of agreement from the doorway. Holmes went on. You see, Mr. Treadcroft, sir, Alaric's heart was weak. You knew this, and you knew he planned to expose certain creative accounting practices within the Royal Club, practices that would have ruined several investors. So you arranged a demonstration in his study under the guise of showing him the preservative's power. You placed the compound upon the mirror and instructed him to watch. What he saw, his reflection fading beneath frost, the illusion of death itself, was enough to stop his heart. No blade, no poison, no witness, merely terror, cold and clean. Miss Whitby gasped softly. Treadcroft's jaw clenched. You have no proof, he said coldly. You weave fairy tales from fog. Holmes's eyes sharpened. On the contrary, I have the invoice for the shipment of crystalline vapor to your laboratory dated 2 days before Sir Alaric's death, signed by your own hand. I have Foyle's confession implicating your payment for his silence. And I have Miss Whitby, whose testimony regarding the frost upon the mirror completes the chain. Tell me, Treadcroft, do you still deny it? For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The only sound was the ticking of the clock and the faint crackle of the fire. Then Treadcroft laughed. Softly, without mirth. You are clever, Mr. Holmes. But you mistake necessity for guilt. I did what was required to preserve order. Sir Alaric's revelations would have ruined hundreds. Good families, innocent lives. Sometimes a single death prevents many. Holmes regarded him coolly. Ah, the old philosophy that the end justifies the means. I have heard it from generals, thieves, and kings. It never improves with repetition. Treadcroft's calm began to crumble. You think yourself a judge of men, Holmes? You who live on deductions and dust. You have never known what it means to hold power, to keep chaos at bay. Holmes rose, his voice low and cutting. On the contrary, I know precisely what it means. Power without conscience is chaos itself. Lestrade stepped forward, producing a warrant. Basil Treadcroft, you are under arrest for the murder of Sir Alaric Denham. Treadcroft's eyes flashed. You'll never make it stick. Holmes gave a thin smile. Then you will forgive me if I take comfort in the attempt. The constables moved in, and for a moment I thought the matter concluded. But Treadcroft, with a sudden desperate strength, seized a vial from the mantel and hurled it at the fire. It shattered, releasing a burst of cold white vapor that swept across the room. Frost bloomed instantly on the walls and glass. Miss Whitby screamed. Holmes lunged forward, pulling her aside as I dashed to open the window. The cold mist curled like smoke, biting into the lungs. Treadcroft staggered backward, his face turning ashen, eyes wild. Do you see, Holmes? He rasped. Even frost can burn. Then he fell, motionless, the last tendrils of vapor rising from his hand like the soul of winter itself. When the air cleared, Holmes knelt beside him, checking the pulse. Dead, he murmured. The compound he made was his own undoing. Poetic if one has the stomach for irony. Lestrade coughed, waving away the smoke. The devil take these clever fellows, never can they just surrender like honest criminals. Holmes stood, brushing frost from his coat. No, Lestrade. They prefer to write their confessions in the air. Fleeting, but final. Miss Whitby trembled, tears glistening in her eyes. It's over, she whispered. Holmes regarded her gently. Yes, Miss Whitby, the frost has melted, but truth once uncovered leaves a chill that never quite departs. Outside, as we stepped into the crisp night, the frost glittered across the cobblestones like shattered glass. Holmes drew deeply from his pipe, exhaling a plume of smoke that mingled with the mist. "You see, Watson," he said quietly, "there are crimes of passion, and there are crimes of preservation. This was the latter, an attempt to freeze corruption before it spoiled the air, but in doing so they froze their own souls." I nodded silently, for no words seemed adequate. The gas lamps burned dim, their halos wavering in the fog, and as we walked toward the waiting cab I felt again that peculiar blend of awe and melancholy that so often followed Holmes's triumphs. The night was cold, yes, but somehow London seemed a little less so now that the frost had unmasked its maker. Chapter 9. Shadows beneath the thaw. The following day dawned gray and restless, as though London itself had woken uneasy from a troubled dream. The frost that had glittered so fiercely the night before had melted into puddles that mirrored the pale sky. But there was little warmth in the air. The newspapers screamed the name Basil Treadcroft across every front page. The banker of death, frozen murder at Kensington, Holmes solves icy mystery. The city, ever hungry for scandal, feasted upon the tale. At 221B Baker Street I found Holmes seated at the breakfast table, the Times spread open before him, a faint smile playing about his lips. His teacup, untouched, had gone cold, a telltale sign that his mind was elsewhere. "You appear satisfied," I remarked, taking my place opposite him. He looked up, the gleam in his eyes as sharp as ever. "Satisfied, yes, though not content. A case may conclude in law, Watson, yet remain incomplete in truth. You doubt that Treadcroft was the sole culprit?" Holmes folded the paper neatly, his long fingers precise and deliberate. "He was the architect, no doubt. But every structure requires foundation and mortar. We have seen the edifice of deceit crumble. Now we must examine what supported it." Before I could inquire further, Mrs. Hudson entered with the morning's post, a single envelope, sealed in dark green wax. Holmes examined it briefly, then arched an eyebrow. "From Lady Draycott," he murmured. "From prison?" I asked. "Indeed. Curious that she should write so soon." He broke the seal and read. His expression shifted, first to surprise, then to something graver. Without a word, he handed me the letter. "Mr. Holmes, I have learned of Mr. Treadcroft's death and of your success in exposing his treachery. Yet there is one truth you have not uncovered, one that weighs upon my soul heavier than any chain. Sir Alaric Denham did not die by fright alone. There was another hand that night unseen by Treadcroft or myself. Seek the mirror, Mr. Holmes. The frost may have melted, but its reflection remains. Lady Draycott." I lowered the letter, perplexed. Another hand? What can she mean? Holmes's eyes had narrowed in thought. She speaks of the mirror again. Curious, Watson. Why should that single object appear in every testimony? Miss Whitby saw frost upon it. Lady Draycott concealed it. Even Treadcroft used it as the stage for his illusion. He rose abruptly, his movements brisk with purpose. "Fetch your coat, Watson. We are returning to Denham House." The journey to Richmond was a quiet one. The countryside, stripped bare by winter, rolled past our cab like a wash of grays and browns. The great house, when we arrived, stood solemn against the sky. Its windows shuttered, its gardens choked with frost-bitten ivy. It was a house that seemed to remember tragedy. The butler, a nervous old fellow named Cribb, recognized Holmes at once and admitted us without question. "No one has been in the study since the night of the death, sir," he said, his voice trembling. "It's just as it was left." Holmes's eyes brightened. "Excellent. Lead the way." The study was just as I remembered from our first visit. The heavy drapes, the scent of dust and old books, the faint chill that seemed to emanate from the very walls. But there, dominating the far side of the room, stood the mirror, tall, gilt-edged, and faintly clouded, as though reluctant to show its full reflection. Holmes approached it slowly, his gaze fixed upon its surface. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "The discoloration at the corners, that is not tarnish but chemical residue. Yet there is something more." He reached into his pocket, withdrew a small lens, and examined the glass closely. After a moment, he gave a short, sharp exclamation. "Ha, as I suspected." "What is it?" I asked, stepping closer. He pointed to a faint irregularity at the mirror's edge. "A hinge. The mirror is no ordinary piece of glass. It conceals something behind it." With careful pressure, he pried at the frame. It swung forward with a low creak, revealing a hidden compartment recessed into the wall. Within lay a narrow metal cylinder capped at both ends. Holmes lifted it gently and examined the surface. "A pneumatic tube," he said softly. "Used for sending documents or messages between rooms. Ingenious. And note the faint corrosion on the edges, the residue of the crystalline vapor. It was released through this very opening. Then the vapor that frightened Sir Alaric was not triggered by Treadcroft's hand," Holmes finished. "He provided the means, but someone else activated it from within the house." A rustle of fabric made us both turn. Miss Whitby stood in the doorway, pale and trembling. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "I followed you. I had to know what you would find." Holmes regarded her silently for a long moment. "Then perhaps you can answer what Lady Draycott's letter has implied." Her lips parted, but no sound came. Holmes set down the tube, his voice soft but relentless. "You were here that night, Miss Whitby. You claim to have found Sir Alaric after his death. But you also claim to have gone upstairs before the quarrel ended. That was false. You returned sooner, didn't you? You heard the argument and saw Treadcroft flee." Her eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered. "He left the door open. I went in. I thought Sir Alaric had fainted. He was gasping, clutching his chest. I tried to help him." "But you triggered the mirror," Holmes said gently. "You pressed the switch, thinking it would light the lamp or summon help. Instead, the vapor burst forth, sealing his fate." She sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. "I didn't know. I swear it. He was kind to me. I never meant—" Holmes laid a hand upon her shoulder. "No one doubts your innocence of intent, Miss Whitby. But the truth must be complete, no matter how sorrowful." For a time there was silence, only the ticking of the clock and the faint moan of the wind outside. At last Holmes spoke again, his tone softer. "You see, Watson, this was no simple case of greed or malice. It was a tapestry woven of fear, pride, and misjudgment. Treadcroft built the mechanism. Lady Draycott concealed the aftermath, and Miss Whitby, through ignorance and chance, delivered the final act." She looked up at him, eyes red with tears. "Will they punish me?" Holmes's face was grave but kind. "The law punishes intent, not accident. I shall see to it that your role is understood. Sir Alaric's death was not murder alone. It was tragedy." As we left the house, the sun at last broke through the clouds, casting a wan light over the frozen lawns. Holmes paused at the gate, looking back at the tall, silent house. "Strange, is it not, Watson?" he said softly. "How truth, like frost, lingers long after warmth has gone. Yet even frost, when touched by light, reveals what lies beneath, the reflection of every hidden flaw." And as we turned toward Baker Street once more, I thought that no mirror, however polished, could ever show the depth of sorrow that lingered in that place, or the quiet compassion that lived within Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 10. The Final Reflection. The snow had melted away by the time we returned to Baker Street, leaving behind only the faint scent of damp stone and soot that so often hung over London. Yet even amid the thaw, I sensed that Holmes's thoughts remained in that cold chamber of Denham House, turning and returning the final threads of our strange affair. He had spent the morning pacing, a sure sign that his mind, though outwardly tranquil, was working with feverish precision. His violin lay untouched upon its stand, the fire burned low. Only the scratch of his pen against paper broke the silence, as he composed what I later learned was a report to Inspector Lestrade. At last, I could bear it no longer. "Holmes," I said, "you've scarcely spoken a word since we left Richmond. The case is over. Why do you still look so burdened?" He leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant but glimmering. "Over, yes, in the sense that a book may be closed, Watson, but the tale remains within its pages. This affair has been unlike any other. It has shown me that truth, however clear, is rarely kind." He rose and went to the window, gazing out upon the gray street below, where the last puddles reflected the smoke-dimmed daylight. "Do you recall what Lady Draycott said in her letter? 'Seek the mirror, Mr. Holmes.' I have pondered that phrase. It was more than an instruction. It was an appeal to conscience." "Conscience?" I repeated. "You believe she sought redemption?" "Indeed," said Holmes quietly. "Lady Draycott was not a murderer in the conventional sense. She concealed the truth not for gain, but for shame, for the ruin her folly had caused. Treadcroft's death brought her no peace. She died knowing that she had built a fortress of silence upon another's grave." He turned from the window, his expression softening. "And as for Miss Whitby, poor soul, she will live forever with the knowledge that her innocent action proved fatal. No punishment devised by man could equal the one her heart will impose upon itself." I sighed. "Then you believe there was no villainy in the end?" "There was vanity," Holmes said gravely. "There was ambition. There was fear. The elements of evil are seldom pure. They are but distortions of common virtues. Consider Treadcroft, a man of intellect, invention, and skill. He might have been a pioneer of science, yet greed twisted him into a merchant of deceit. Sir Alaric, too, a man of wealth and reputation, who could not bear the truth of his failures. The frost that covered that lane, Watson, was not born of winter alone." For some time we sat in silence, each lost in thought. Then quite suddenly Holmes reached for his violin and began to play, a slow, haunting melody that filled the room with a melancholy beauty. The notes trembled like snowflakes in the air, fragile yet clear. When he finished, he set the bow down gently. "Music, my dear Watson, is the mirror of the mind. In its tones we hear not what is, but what has been lost." There was a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "This arrived for you, Mr. Holmes, no sender's name." Holmes accepted it with mild curiosity. He untied the string, and within lay a small framed object, a fragment of the mirror from Denham House, its surface cracked but still glinting faintly. Attached was a note in an elegant, trembling hand. "To Mr. Sherlock Holmes, may you see in this reflection not the horror of the past, but the light you brought to it." Monsieur Whitby Holmes held the fragment up to the light. It caught the fire's glow and fractured it into a dozen tiny suns. "Strange," he murmured, "how even a broken mirror may hold a perfect reflection." He placed it carefully upon the mantel, beside his tobacco jar and a small framed photograph of the late Irene Adler. Then he sat once more and regarded me with a faint smile. "Watson," he said, "there is one truth we detectives often forget, that behind every puzzle lies a heart. We chase motives, patterns, clues. But in the end it is emotion that shapes every crime and every act of mercy." I nodded slowly. And what emotion guided this one, Holmes? Fear, he said. Fear of truth, fear of loss, fear of being seen for what one truly is. But in facing that fear, even too late, Lady Draycott achieved what few ever do. She found honesty. Outside, the fog was beginning to roll in again. Soft tendrils curling about the gas lamps, casting halos of golden mist. Holmes rose, drew his dressing gown closer, and looked out once more. Do you know what the most curious thing is, Watson? What's that? That I, too, have looked into a mirror today, he said softly. And in its depths, I have seen not the face of the detective, but of the man who might, if fate were kinder, understand compassion as deeply as logic. He turned back, the flicker of the fire catching in his eyes. We are all frozen lanes, my friend, our truths buried beneath layers of reason and pride. But when warmth returns, the ice gives way and the reflection remains, clear, unyielding and eternal. I rose and placed a hand upon his shoulder. Holmes, I said, you have done more than solve a mystery. You have freed the living from the weight of their silence. He smiled faintly, the rare warmth of friendship softening his austere features. Then let us hope, Watson, that in the end, truth, like spring, comes for us all. As the evening deepened, and the fog pressed close against the window panes, Holmes resumed his violin. The melody was lighter this time, not of sorrow, but of release. And as I listened, I could almost believe that the ghosts of Denham House had been laid to rest at last, their frozen reflections dissolving into the gentle thaw of understanding. Thus ended the affair of the Frozen Lane Truth, a case that began in shadow and frost and concluded in the quiet warmth of revelation. And though many more adventures awaited us beyond the walls of 221B Baker Street, I would long remember that winter, not for its mysteries, but for the reflection it cast upon the soul of Sherlock Holmes.